Hello everyone, how's it going? It is Tyrnor as always, and I thought it was time to do another Q&A video because I haven't done one in a while and questions have piled up, and I try not to overcrowd these Q&A videos with too many questions, even though this video will probably have a lot of questions. Also, I'll be taking this next week off because I want to finish leveling in Shadowlands and reading, exploring Azeroth, the Eastern Kingdoms when Bloody arrives, so that I can keep up to date with the lore and actually know what the hell I'm talking about. That's also the reason why you haven't seen a lore facts in a few weeks, because I like to keep up to date with the lore, pretty much. The background footage that you see is a game that I played through about 5 years ago. I didn't finish the playthrough because my save file corrupted and I didn't have the energy or the willpower to replay the game to that point again. It's called Telepath Tactics, and it's made by someone who created a series of Flash games that I greatly enjoyed as a child, so I felt at the time compelled to play through that game. But yeah, going into the questions themselves. The first question is from Christian. I'm going to stop trying to pronounce your last name because I keep messing it up and I don't want to cause offense or anything. So from Christian, who asked me on my Bloodsail Buccaneer video, I had no idea the Bloodsail comic existed. How did you discover and acquire it? And as I told him, the Bloodsail Buccaneer comic is part of the Warcraft Legends series, which is a 5-volume compilation of stories in a sort of a manga format that Blizzard published more than 10 years ago, I think. The most notable one of that series is probably the Trag Highmountain series, and where much of the backstory of Trag Highmountain comes from. The Bloodsail Buccaneer comic is not particularly notable, but it was relevant at the time for the video, so that's why I brought it up. As to how I discovered it when reading Warcraft Legends, and I acquired Warcraft Legends from a local bookstore. There you go. Next question is from Wikipedia Intellectual of that, and it's related to the origin of the Drogbar, and there will also be a similar question about this later on. And he asked me, asked in general, anyone else figured that the Drogbar are perhaps a variant of proto-trolls that dire-trolls harken back to? I mean, obviously they are inspired from bugbears in D&D, but the visual similarities are striking. Even their bony, stony bits resemble the osteoderms of Zandalari. And as I replied, maybe. I find their cultures to be way too different, but as I told him, a lot of things can happen in tens of thousands of years. So it's possible. Unfortunately, related to the Drogbar, they are one of the races that we don't really know the origins of, because Chronicle Volume 1 didn't really go into those. We do know the origins of the Trolls, in that they were one of the very first races to spring up from Azeroth after the Titans ordained the world, etc., to spring up naturally and not be Titanforged. But we don't know anything about the Drogbar. It's possible that they're more related to the Titanforged because they were slaves at Deathwing, but it's also possible that they're not, because goblins were also slaves of Deathwing and they're not related to the Titanforged, so who knows? It's a very open-ended answer, but again, we have absolutely no idea. Next is a question from Christian again. Two questions actually. Would I consider Jorin Deadeye to be a minor character? And I said at the time, yes, he's a little bit on the upper end, but yes, and I actually did a video on him. There you go. When am I going to complete the Zandalari allied race intro scenario? I honestly forgot about that at the time. I probably will at some point and maybe even film it. I don't see why not. It's not like by filming it, I'm taking away a lot of time from other videos, so it wouldn't be like a sacrifice to do so. Yeah, I might do it. Sure, why not? I already know what happens, but as with the Magar question, it would be nice to get my thoughts on the spot, I guess. Next is a question from Sluxer. What do I think are the weirdest race class combos? And I'll also put my answer on the screen. And I answered that I think Goblin Shaman is definitely the weirdest one, even though they've repeatedly tried to explain Goblin Shamans on a few occasions, especially in Cataclysm. I still find it a bit odd. Nightbone Warlocks would also be a close second. And I also answered if he was asking for hypothetical ones, those that haven't been implemented yet. Void Elf Paladins would be the most antithetical. Okay. Next is a question from Victor Voya, who asked if I would do a video, a minor character showcase on Trag Highmountain. Maybe. He said that he never found out what happened to him after the Sunroad trilogy, and as I mentioned previously, Trag Highmountain's story is detailed upon in the Warcraft Legends series. Would I do a video about him? Trag Highmountain is a bit on the upper end of minor characters in my opinion, because he's a supporting character in the Sunroad trilogy, so he would qualify as minor overall, but he is the main character in like 3 or 4 manga stories, so that obviously pushes his rating up a little bit. Still, in the overall picture of Warcraft, I suppose he is a minor character, so he's on the list, I guess. He's definitely one of my more favorite, I guess, minor characters, so if I would consider him to be a minor character, I would like to do a video on him, but that sort of remains to be seen, and also it depends on what people vote for in the polls that I post for my minor characters. Next would be a question from Sickjot23, who asked me, sort of in the same vein, if I would consider Renferal to be a minor character, and yeah, she definitely would be. Even though she's a bit of a recurring character, she's definitely a minor character. Okay. Next is also a question from Christian, who asked me on my anonymous orc minor character showcase that relates to a character in the Lord of the Clans novel. If he hasn't read the book, does it describe why Taretha actually became Thrall's friend? And the answer is yes. It's a very important part of the book, and it's probably one of the more well done parts of that novel. Okay. Next is a question from Miguel Francesco Hogar, who asked on my Gromos video, what are the purposes of the pack yaks when the packers carry the stuff? And as I replied to him, the pack yaks are also an extra pair of hands to help with carrying. You can't like solve everything with manpower, especially in like mountainous regions where population tends to be more sparse. Also, as I told him, if the yaks are clean, they are good fortune, and he correctly said that yes, they are lucky dues. Next is a question from Matteo El Distolero, I hope I said that right, on my Warhammer Dwarves video, who asked, wait, what happened to the Twilight Highlands? Because I mentioned in the video that they were conquered by the Legion. And that's in reference to just one line in a quest in the Shaman Order Hall storyline in Legion. I think it was when you went to go and get a Doomhammer, but at any rate, Stormcaller Mirla at one point during the quest, A Ring Unbroken, says, the Highlands are completely overrun by the Legion. The clan is scattered. So it's in reference to that. Okay. Next is a question from D0009 Project Life, who asked, aren't the Alterac Mountains much larger in the lore, obviously, than in the game? Obviously, and this applies to all of the zones. Not to like spoil anything, but we just recorded another session of the TTRPG that I'm doing with Doom Goblins, Surfarmshire, and Skull Shorties, and the question of scale definitely came up. Suffice to say, Stranglethorn Vale is very, very big, and I took that into account in my video. And yeah, Alterac is also very, very, very big in the lore. Much bigger than just a small city town that I wouldn't even call that, and a few mountains, as it is in the game. Okay. Next is a question from Christian, who asked me if I would do a video discussing my expectations for Warchief Gaming, Dreamhaven, and Frost Giant Studios. No, mostly just because I don't really cover news stories. I'm interested in what they will eventually put out, and if it's interesting enough to me, I will perhaps cover it when it does come out. But I'm not just going to say, hey, here's a new studio made by former Blizzard devs, including Chris Metzen at one point. Yeah, it's interesting, but no, not video worthy for me because I don't generally do news. Next is a question from Christian again, which is a very long-winded answer that I probably won't be capable of doing in this video. Who asked, can I explain the difference between frost magic used by Death Knights and by mages? And to quote the answer that Blizzard gave, quote, unlike mages who learn to harness frost magic to great effect, these Death Knights are born of it, rhyme gripping their decaying hearts. Which is more of a philosophical answer at any rate. To go into detail on this answer, I actually talked with Necroxus at one point in a Twitter exchange that went on for about 30 tweets about a year or two ago, where we talked about elementals and such, and it relates to this question. And we went into great depth because the Last Guardian novel also goes into depth at one point about what goes into place when a mage summons a fireball, and it's obviously related to this because frost magic is not that different. And it's a whole philosophical discussion with a lot of differing sources that would say one thing but would imply another. So I can't give a very quick answer. To sort of say, build upon what Blizzard had said and sort of also give a quick answer, I would imagine mage frost magic would be using the arcane to shape nature to your will, while Death Knight frost magic would be using the inherent undead and chilly power that Death Knights are born with. Again, this is more of a philosophical answer than an actual practical answer. Next is a question from Egefet on, I hope I said that right, on my Knights of the Ebon Blade video, who asked me if the Host of Suffering is mentioned anywhere outside of Wrath of the Lich King. The Host of Suffering, for those out of the loop, is sort of the replacement Death Knight group that the Lich King Arthas came up with to replace the Knights of the Ebon Blade after their defection. And the answer to that question is no, not really at all. But then again, they didn't really have a chance to showcase themselves because the Knights of the Ebon Blade sabotaged them very early on in the Icecrown questline. And also, I don't quite remember if during the Shadowlands Death Rising event, if Orbaz Bloodbane, the leader of the Host of Suffering, is present among the Icecrown rares. There you go. Next is a question from Gabriel V, and also there was another person who asked this on my Humans of Northrend video. What if all of these settlements of the humans that are native to Northrend were built by descendants of the Vrykul that would eventually evolve into humans, and not by the humans that immigrated from the Eastern Kingdoms? And as I answered him and another person, I highly doubt it, mainly for two reasons. The first and most important, that they speak Common and not Vrykul. And the second is that at the very least, the Grizzly Hills trappers use gunpowder weapons, which were invented by the dwarves a few hundred years ago in the Eastern Kingdoms. That latter part is also not necessarily a very strong argument, because they could have adopted the gunpowder weapons in the meantime. They don't take, well, the main advantage of gunpowder weapons is that they don't take as much training to use when compared to bows or such. But yeah, the main sticking point is that they speak Common and not Vrykul. Next is a question also related to the origin of the Drogbar from Gin RR, who asked if they could be a failed attempt, as in sort of a bridge between Troggs and proper Titan constructs. And as I told him, official lore only points to 2 attempts, which resulted in the Troggs and the Irvin. However, as Blizzard is known to do, they change their lore and their story all the time. It's entirely possible that there was one extra attempt. Maybe the Drogbar were part of it. It's hard to say. Next is a question from Luke Corvo, who asked me if I will be reading Exploring Azeroth. And yeah, as I mentioned in the introduction to this video, I definitely will read it. I'm looking forward to it a lot, because looking into side stories and flavor, lore, etc. is one of the main focuses of my channel. So yeah, definitely. And I'm waiting for it to still be delivered to me. I ordered it, I pre-ordered it, and it still hasn't arrived. There you go. Next is a question from Joshua Jacobs on my Knights of the Ebon Blade video, if I would consider Bolvar's Death Knights to be the 4th generation. For context, the 1st generation would be the Knights of the Old Horde, the 2nd would be Arthas's Death Knights like the Noblemen of Lordaeron, Arthas himself, etc. The 3rd generation would be the Knights of the Ebon Blade of like early Wrath. And if I would consider Bolvar's Death Knights as the 4th generation, sure. The generation classification is not my creation, so I'm not like the highest authority to say that, but sure, yeah, it does fit like sort of a definition of a generation that there's a bit of a skip between the 3rd and the 4th generations, and sure, yeah. Next is a question from Stickjaw23. Given my knowledge of the lore, is it safe to assume that I've read all of the Warcraft novels? Yes, reread them all too several times, well, except Stormrage, and I do need to reread that at some point. And which is my favorite? And I've answered this question a bunch in the past, and I also have a video with Necroxys talking in detail about each of the Warcraft novels, well, those that were released at the time. Which is my favorite? Rise of the Horde, and then in 2nd and 3rd places, in no particular order, would be The Shattering and Beyond the Dark Portal. Next is a question from Kesta Kamal, I hope I said that right, which is not really a question but more of a statement. They wonder why we had a war against the Drakkari, and makes no sense for them. And yeah, it can be kind of hard to assume to guess at first. The overall context of the quests that lead you to Zul'Drak to like fight the Drakkari is that at first there's some Argent Crusade and Knights of the Ebon Blade people who say the Scourge is waging a campaign in Zul'Drak, we need to fight against the Scourge. And there's also a breadcrumb at Grizzly Hills that says that's related to Drakuru, one of the main villains of Zul'Drak, who basically dupes you and who can go to Zul'Drak to deal with him. Yeah. So that's the breadcrumb that leads to fighting against the Scourge, and then the Argent Crusade and the Knights of the Ebon Blade and Zul'Drak are sort of caught in the freeway war because they sort of establish camp right in the middle of the front line between the Drakkari and the Scourge, and obviously the Drakkari attack them as well because they're in their territory. And then the breadcrumb quests lead you to finding the Zandalari and helping them because the Drakkari are sacrificing their Loa, and you need to stop that, and the Zandalari wish to conserve the Drakkari's history, etc, etc, and to save the remaining Loa as such. So yeah, it's a series of incidental effects that lead you to fighting the Drakkari, not really a desire to finish off the Drakkari Empire on your own. Next is a question from Warlord Califar, who asked me if I could do a video on Tharbek from Warcraft 2. For those of you unaware, Tharbek is sort of the quote-unquote player character in Warcraft 2, which is later retconned to be sort of Saurfang, but at the time it was Tharbek. And probably not, because Tharbek is a very strange character. Outside of that like reference in Warcraft 2, he's only mentioned once as one of the second in commands of Orgrim Doomhammer in the Tides of Darkness novel, and he only has like one very short scene in which he's scared of the Alliance. And this was later sort of retconned to where Orgrim Doomhammer had 2 seconds in command, Eitrigg and Saurfang, with Tharbek nowhere to be seen. So Tharbek is on my list, but he's not very high up. I would not, if people were to vote for him, he's not like a character I would be looking forward to making a video on. And I guess the video will probably be like 2 to 3 minutes long at any rate, because there's not much to say about him, unfortunately. He's on my list regardless, and if people vote for him, I'll do a video on him, and obviously I will do my best. I don't like half-ass my videos even if I dislike the topic. But yeah. Next is a question from Christian again, who asked me which race did I pick for my Death Knight, and as I replied to him, implying that I have time to make alts. I still haven't leveled through the Alliance experience in BFA. I've read through the quests, I know the lore, don't worry about that. But in answer to him, probably one of like the old races, because I like the old Death Knight starting zone still, even after doing it like 10 times or so. So it'll probably be, I don't know, like a human or an orc, something very classic, really, and boring perhaps. Next is a question from the Flying Dutchman, who asked me if I have or if I am studying history. And yeah, I have a bachelor's degree in history and a master's in history, and I will be going for a PhD next year. But yeah, I do, and also my IRL workplace is related to history. There you go. Next is a question from Christian again. Any theories to why Blizzard completely forgot that Jorin exists after Burning Crusade? And in answer to him, in general, Blizzard in general sets up a lot of plot threads without the specific intention of carrying them forward. It's a fairly sloppy way of storytelling, but it's their way of telling stories, I guess. They don't really plan things much in advance with the intention of telling an intricate story. Rather, they set up a lot of plot threads and then decide, oh, maybe we can pick this up again, unfortunately. But yeah, as to why they forgot that Jorin exists, they couldn't find a spot for him, basically. I would argue, and I did a video on that he would have fit in Warlords of Draenor in the Tanan Jungle storyline, because Bleeding Hollow, he is a Bleeding Hollow, he would know how to deal with them, etc, etc. But yeah, there you go. Next is a question from Egefet, once again, who asked me, would I make a top 5 video of my most disliked retcons? And as I answered him, probably not, because that list changes a lot and fairly often. Blizzard constantly retcons their stuff from expansion to expansion, from novel to novel, comic to comic, etc, etc. So probably not, because my top 5 would be what I find to be most annoying at the time of making the video. So I also answered him that in general, the retcons that I find most annoying are those that like change the personality and the backstory of a character almost entirely, and Eldon would be the most egregious example of that, because they changed it 2, arguably even 3 times, and his current iteration is a bit of, he's like a main character in an Expendables movie at the moment. It's still better than his Burning Crusade iteration, but anyway, I digress. So yeah, probably not, because it's a topic that, it's an answer that changes a lot, and yeah. And yeah, that's actually the final question. Thank you all for watching and listening. Please leave any questions you might have in the comments below. I also picked them up from all of the videos that come in the meantime. Thank you once again. As I said, I'll be taking a break this week, minus the TTRPG, which will go up on Skull Shorty's channel. But yeah, thank you all for watching and listening, and I'll see you all later. Farewell.